We all like to believe we're good, just humane people, incapable of cruelty or inhuman acts. But what if the right circumstances, or the wrong ones, could awaken something in us we never imagined? Something dark, something monstrous. The truth is, the boundary between good and evil isn't as sharp as we'd like to think. That line, however thin, runs much closer to our own hearts than we care to admit. We live in a world where difficult choices, extreme situations, and powerful social forces can twist even the best intentions into actions once thought unthinkable. This is the channel Procrustean Bed. My name is Roman, and I want to begin with a small apology. To soften my strong accent, I use AI narration. I hope this doesn't diminish your experience of the video. Also, if you enjoy this work, please give it a like and leave a comment, so it doesn't vanish into YouTube's endless abyss of recommendations. Today, we'll descend into the depths of human nature, uncomfortable but necessary. We'll ask what drives good people to cross that fragile line, and more importantly, how we can resist it. Have you ever considered that your morality, the inner compass you trust to guide your choices, might be more flexible than it seems? That it might bend like a leaf in the wind? What defines us as good or bad is far from absolute. The moral principles we imagine as unshakable fortresses can collapse in a matter of seconds under the right conditions. Given the right pressures, anyone can commit acts that challenge everything they once believed about themselves. The darker side of human nature is not a myth. It's a reality we cannot escape. But by understanding it, we can learn to keep it in check. Because the monsters don't live under the bed. They live in our hearts, right alongside our finest qualities. So what is this inner darkness, and where does it come from? And what forces around us have the power to unleash it? To begin answering these questions, we first have to look inward. Darkness lives not only in the world around us, but also within each of us. The human psyche has hidden corners, primitive instincts and drives inherited from our distant ancestors. Sigmund Freud believed that deep within the human soul lies a primal aggressiveness, a kind of death instinct that pushes us toward destructive acts. Civilization tries to restrain this force with laws, moral codes, and upbringing, but it never truly disappears, it merely slumbers, like a predator waiting in the shadows of the unconscious. Every one of us is capable of feeling anger, envy, greed. These are natural human emotions. Even children can display cruelty before they learn empathy, like a toddler pulling a cat's tail, unaware of the pain they cause. With time, we learn to control our impulses, to distinguish right from wrong. But those primal urges don't vanish. They hide behind the mask of civility, waiting for the right moment. The Swiss psychologist Carl Jung called this hidden side of personality the shadow. Our shadow is everything we'd rather not acknowledge in ourselves. Fear, vice, aggression, shame, weakness. Jung wrote that everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is recognized, the darker and denser it becomes. In other words, when we deny the existence of our inner monster, we only make it stronger. The person who believes themselves incapable of evil is often the least prepared to resist it when temptation arrives. So yes, the seeds of the monster are already planted in human nature, but does that mean we are doomed to become evil? Not at all. Most people live their entire lives without committing great crimes because those dark impulses can be kept under control. What matters is understanding that the capacity for cruelty is part of who we are. Recognizing it doesn't make us worse. It makes us more vigilant. Our inner beast may awaken, but it doesn't determine our fate on its own. Much depends on the conditions we find ourselves in and the temptations we encounter. Why does one person, after a life of ordinary decency, suddenly become a perpetrator, while another does not? The answer often lies not only within the individual, but in the power of circumstances. Let's turn then to the force of the situation, the power that can rouse the sleeping monster. Now let's turn to the power of circumstances, the external environment that can radically reshape our behavior. Philip Zimbardo calls the fragility of human morality a situational metamorphosis. We are not fixed beings. We are shaped by context, by social pressure, and above all, by the stories we tell ourselves to justify our actions. Consider a real case. An American soldier named Ivan Frederick, before his deployment to the infamous Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq, was, by all accounts, an ordinary man with solid principles. He loved his family and believed sincerely that he was serving his country with honor. But once immersed in an environment where violence was normalized, the enemy dehumanized, and moral oversight nearly absent, he became a participant in unspeakable acts of torture. Was he evil at his core, or did circumstances make him so? Context can create a chasm between who we believe ourselves to be and how we act under extreme pressure. Our morality is sometimes written not in stone, but in sand. This was starkly demonstrated by the famous Stanford prison experiment. Within just a few days, perfectly normal, mentally healthy students who had been randomly assigned to play the roles of guards and prisoners found themselves in a nightmare. Those in the role of guards, protected by uniforms and a sense of power, began humiliating and abusing the prisoners. What drove ordinary young men to cross the line of decency so quickly? And if you had been in their place, would you have acted differently? But this fragility doesn't belong only to extreme events. Even small everyday situations reveal how deeply context shapes us, often without our awareness. Have you ever taken something that wasn't yours and brushed it off as no big deal? Have you laughed at a cruel joke simply because everyone else was laughing? Such small acts are like pebbles on the path that leads toward the very moral abyss we fear. And so we arrive at a crucial question. To what extent do our actions truly reflect who we are? And to what extent are they simply the product of the environment we inhabit? Context doesn't just influence, it transforms. So how do we resist this invisible but powerful force? Can we prepare ourselves not to bend under circumstances, or are we destined to drift with the current? Why do we obey? It's a simple question, but the answer reveals one of the most unsettling aspects of human nature. From early childhood, we're taught to respect and follow authority. Parents, teachers, leaders. Obedience often feels like the foundation of social order. But what happens when the authority we obey asks us to do something that clashes with our deepest values? Picture yourself as a participant in an experiment. You enter a laboratory, greeted by a researcher in a white coat. You're told to administer electric shocks to another person whenever they answer a test question incorrectly. From the next room, you hear screams of pain, pleas to stop. You hesitate, but the authoritative scientist insists, "Please continue. This is essential for the experiment." Most of us like to believe we would refuse. But the reality was different. In Stanley Milgram's legendary experiment, about 65% of participants kept delivering shocks all the way to the maximum level, potentially lethal, despite their conscience telling them to stop. Why? Simply because someone in a lab coat told them to. What is it about authority that overrides our moral compass? Part of the answer lies in how we perceive figures of power. When someone holds a title or position, we assume they have special knowledge or the right to command. We convince ourselves that our actions, even harmful ones, are justified because I was just following orders. If something goes wrong, it won't be our fault, but theirs. This transfer of responsibility creates a dangerous distance between our actions and their consequences. And history shows that blind obedience is no laboratory illusion. It runs through the darkest chapters of our past. Soldiers in totalitarian regimes excused atrocities by saying they were just carrying out orders. The German-American philosopher Hannah Arendt called this the banality of evil. The idea that the worst crimes can be committed not by monsters with demonic intent, but by ordinary people obeying without thought, unwilling to take responsibility, or consider the Jonestown Massacre, where hundreds of people followed the commands of a charismatic leader into mass suicide. In all these cases, the danger wasn't innate evil, but the inability or unwillingness to question authority. Think about it. How many times have you followed a rule or order without thinking, simply because it came from above? Maybe it was something trivial, a bureaucratic policy at work, but what if the order were more serious? What if you were told to do something you believe is wrong, with no easy way to refuse? Would you have the courage to resist, or would the comfort of obedience prevail? Obedience to authority is a powerful force, but it is not absolute. We can learn to recognize its pull, to question it, and when necessary, to resist it. That takes courage, and above all, the acknowledgement that in the end, we are always responsible for our own actions, no matter who gave the order. And here lies the problem. Blind obedience becomes even more dangerous when combined with another disturbing force, dehumanization. How do you make one person treat another with cruelty? The answer lies not only in orders or context, but in something deeper, dehumanization. This phenomenon is as old as humanity itself. It is the key to transforming another person into something less than human, a being undeserving of our empathy. Once we stop seeing others as people, obedience to even the harshest commands becomes far easier. Dehumanization is insidious, a nearly invisible psychological trap. It often begins with words, with labels that reduce a complex, multi-dimensional human being to a single negative trait. History is filled with such examples. In Nazi camps, Jews were called rats. During the Rwandan genocide, the Tutsi were called cockroaches. These words didn't just describe, they distorted reality. They made it easier to look away, or worse, to participate in atrocities. But it's not only about grand historical tragedies. Dehumanization happens every day in small ways. Think of the labels we sometimes use for groups of people: lazy, criminals, parasites. Such words create emotional distance, a moral gap that allows us to ignore or excuse the suffering of others. Have you ever caught yourself using or silently accepting such labels without questioning them? And how would it feel if you were the one being reduced to a word? The psychologist Albert Bandura conducted a telling experiment. He asked students to punish another group of people. Beforehand, some students overheard those people being called animals. The results were striking. Those who heard the insult delivered significantly harsher punishments. A single degrading word was enough to dull empathy and justify cruelty. Now think of the modern era. Online, we often interact through screens. The person on the other side doesn't feel fully real to us, a whole human being with emotions, history, and dignity. Instead, they're an avatar, a username, a comment. This digital dehumanization creates the perfect soil for bullying, harassment, and hate speech. Shielded by anonymity and distance, people sometimes say things they would never dare say face to face. Have you ever taken part in this toxic cycle, perhaps without even realizing it? And what, if anything, could stop you? Dehumanization is dangerous precisely because it creeps in quietly. To treat someone cruelly, we don't have to hate them. We simply need to stop seeing them as human. But there is a way to resist, to bring into the light what's hidden, to remember that every person is more than a label, that they carry a story, complexity, pain, and dreams. Compassion is the most powerful weapon against dehumanization, but it requires effort, the willingness to look past the surface and to hear what lies beneath the words. And yet there is another factor that magnifies the effects of dehumanization and weakens our sense of responsibility: the feeling of impunity. When we believe our actions have no consequences or that we are shielded by invisibility, evil can thrive. That's what we'll explore next. Have you ever wondered how some people can commit the unthinkable and feel no guilt? The answer often lies in the loss of personal responsibility. This psychological phenomenon severs the link between our actions and their consequences. When we believe we won't be punished, or that we are dissolved in the crowd, moral barriers collapse quickly. This is most visible in situations of anonymity or collective action. Take the behavior of a mob. In a group, people are capable of things they would never dare do alone. Someone who would never smash a window or set fire to a car on their own may suddenly take part in vandalism when hidden in a mass. Does that make them evil? Not necessarily. But the thought, "no one will ever know it was me," creates a space where conscience and fear of judgment are easily discarded. Philip Zimbardo illustrated this with a simple experiment. He left an abandoned car in two different places, one in the Bronx, a struggling neighborhood in New York, and another in the quiet, affluent suburb of Palo Alto, California. In the Bronx, the car was stripped and destroyed within hours. In Palo Alto, it sat untouched for days. The difference? In the crime-ridden Bronx, anonymity was guaranteed. No one feared being recognized. In Palo Alto, the higher chance of being seen or identified kept destructive impulses in check. The lesson is clear. When we believe our actions cannot be traced, we allow ourselves to do what we would never risk under society's watchful eye. The same logic applies online. Hiding behind usernames and avatars, people sometimes say and do things they would never consider in real life. Anonymity is intoxicating. It creates an illusion of impunity. At the same time, in large systems, another phenomenon appears: the diffusion of responsibility. In hierarchies or collective actions, each person tells themselves, "I only did my part. Everyone else is responsible, not me." This was the excuse of soldiers at Abu Ghraib. "I was just following orders." It happens too in corporations or governments where questionable decisions are made by groups. Responsibility spreads so thin that no one feels accountable. When no one is guilty personally, everyone becomes guilty together. Is there a way to resist this? The answer is to consciously take ownership of your actions, even when it seems no one is watching. Taking responsibility is an act of courage. It requires questioning not just the orders we receive, but the stories we tell ourselves to justify our choices. And there is yet another tool that reinforces the loss of responsibility and makes the unacceptable appear acceptable: language. Language is a powerful tool, one that can heal, but also one that can corrode our morality. The way we name our actions shapes how we perceive them. When words become a mask for reality, they make the unacceptable seem acceptable. Through language, we often unconsciously absolve ourselves of responsibility and soothe our conscience. Think about how cruelty is so often softened with euphemisms. Soldiers say, "neutralize the target" instead of "kill a person." Bureaucrats report collateral damage instead of the death of civilians. Dictatorships speak of restoring order instead of violently crushing protest. Even in daily life, we use the same trick: borrowed without asking instead of stole, teach him a lesson instead of took revenge. These words create distance from the truth of our actions. Evil hides behind a curtain of language and no longer looks like evil. We also weave entire narratives to justify ourselves. "I did it for a greater cause. Everyone else does it. I had no choice. I was just following orders." Such stories let us look in the mirror and not see a monster. We convince ourselves that our actions are justified by circumstance or good intentions, even when doubt lingers deep inside. Think about how easy it is to talk yourself into the wrong decision simply by finding the right words for it. Language can lull us into moral sleep, but it can also awaken us. If we begin calling things by their real names, cruelty as cruelty, lies as lies, we strip evil of its disguise. It's painful, but necessary. Honest words leave no room for comforting illusions, only the raw awareness of consequences. So if we want to resist sliding into the abyss of cruelty, we must watch not only our actions, but also the words we use to excuse them. Honesty with ourselves is the first step toward moral resilience. And beyond that, it all comes down to choice, the conscious choice we make in every moment. Resisting evil is not a matter of luck, nor of some rare inborn goodness. It is a skill, something we develop day by day, moment by moment, through small actions that affirm our humanity and our responsibility. A conscious moral choice is an act of courage, because it often means going against the current. Think of the participants in Milgram's experiment who refused to continue shocking another person. They weren't stronger or smarter than the rest, but in the decisive moment they took responsibility. They chose to say, "No, this is where I stop." In doing so, they showed that true heroism is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to do what is right, even when fear is present. This kind of conscious choice also appears in ordinary situations. How many times have you witnessed something wrong and decided not to intervene? Perhaps someone was insulted and you stayed silent, or a cashier accidentally gave you too much change and you kept it, telling yourself it was nothing. Each of these moments is a test, a small exam of our integrity, a chance to stand by our values in a world that often tempts us to betray them. Every decision, no matter how small, adds a stroke to the portrait of who we are. When we compromise our conscience in the little things, it becomes harder to stand firm in the great trials. But the reverse is also true. By training ourselves in honesty and kindness in the small moments, we prepare the ground for courage when it matters most. Philip Zimbardo reminds us, heroism is not a grand gesture reserved for great figures or extraordinary circumstances. More often, it is revealed when an ordinary person makes a choice that no one else dared to make. One striking example of this kind of everyday heroism is the story of Wesley Autry, known as the subway hero. One day in New York, he saw a man suffer a seizure and fall onto the subway tracks. Without a moment's hesitation, Wesley leapt down, pressed the man into the trench between the rails, and shielded him with his own body. A train thundered over them, and by some miracle both survived. Wesley never set out to be a hero. He simply made a choice to act in the moment when action was needed. Such a choice often means going against circumstances, defying fear, resisting the passivity of the crowd, even standing up to authority. So how do we prepare ourselves to make the right decision when the moment of testing comes? The answer lies in constant awareness of ourselves and of the world around us. It means cultivating a daily attentiveness to our actions and their consequences. It means questioning the convenient stories we tell ourselves, challenging unjust commands, and above all, remembering every decision, no matter how small, shapes who we are becoming. Conscious choice rests on something fundamental: our ability to see the humanity in others in all its fullness and vulnerability. Without this connection, our decisions risk becoming cold, driven only by fear or by self-interest. But when we look at another person and recognize their pain, their hopes, their weakness, and their beauty, we are reminded that in the end, we all walk the same road of life. The line between good and evil runs through the heart of every one of us. We've seen how fragile human morality can be, and how easily good people, under the right conditions, can do harm. But we've also discovered that in every darkness there flickers a spark of light. Our ability to choose differently. The shadow side of human nature is real, but it is not all-powerful. By acknowledging its presence, we gain the strength to keep it in check. We learn compassion where once there was only judgment or indifference. We learn to take responsibility where it would be easier to hide behind another. We learn to stay alert to the temptations of justifying evil with noble intentions or comforting words. Each of us is imperfect. Each of us carries a small monster inside. But alongside it lives a hero, the conscience, the love, the capacity to recognize another's suffering. The more we come to know our shadow, the less power it holds over us. This awareness does not bring easy peace, but it gives us depth. It teaches us to show compassion to those who stumble and humility in our own righteousness. For we are all human, and all of us can fall, but just as surely, all of us can rise. And after all these reflections, there is silence. In that quiet depth comes the realization. We are not divided once and for all into saints and monsters. In every soul there is both light and darkness, and in each moment, step by step, we choose which one we will give power,